You have been telling me about your work at McGill University, and in particular your focus on the Arctic region. This is an area which we have seen many projections about the amount of ice that could be lost, and there's been a lot of focus on the polar bears. I noticed Coca-Cola have recently launched a White Can campaign, but you've been focusing on the hunters who live up there and whose livelihoods could well be affected if the ice disappears.
Yeah, so we work really on how climate change is affecting people, and the Arctic is a place where that's happening right now. A lot of the hunters we've seen have had to change their routes, have had to take a lot more gas-intensive routes, and have been bringing in a lot less food to the communities that we study.
And in terms of the routes you've been talking about, have they changed in a large way over the past few years?
Yeah, well, what we've really seen, especially over the last year, the last winter, we've had a really extreme ice year, and we've seen a dramatic change in the routes that hunters have been able to take in terms of how far the flow edges has retreated into Frobisher Bay, where we track them, and also in terms of the land routes that they've had to take instead. And as you know, all things, climate change has sort of magnified the impacts that rising gas prices, rising food costs, and a lot of other issues that we see in these communities have.
For sure, and how many people are we talking about?
Well, Iqaluit's a community of 7,000 people. We also do work in smaller Arctic communities that range from 200 to 400 people.
And how sure can you be that the Arctic is changing? I mean, we have seen these projections, we have seen these maps, but there's still a lot of skepticism out there. How sure can you be?
You know, we talk to a lot of people, and every single person I've ever talked to that works or lives in the Arctic has said, you know, it's changed within their lifetimes. And, you know, we talk to people who are 20, we talk to people who are 60. And they all say the same thing. The climate is changing there. It's having an impact on their lives now, and they want us to do something about it.
And what are these hunters relying on? What are they hunting, and how far do they have to go to catch their prey?
Yeah, well, they're hunting a lot of things. In the winter, we see a lot of seal that they hunt out on the flow edge. So that's actually probably the easiest thing for them to do, because they just take their snow machines out onto the ice, and they can hunt right there. And that's, again, just for subsistence. They're not exporting any seal in this community, at least. There's also a fair amount of caribou being hunted. That's off the land generally. And the routes, they can take all day to get to a hunting location. And as you can imagine, it's a bay, so a lot of times people will just, in the winter at least, be able to take their snow machines right across the bay and go along the way. But if the ice isn't stable or secure, they'll have to go all the way around, and you can imagine that takes a lot more gas. They have to carry a lot more fuel, and that costs a lot of money. And so it's really reducing these hunters' ability to have traditional food back in the community.
Do you think focusing on people brings it home to the wider world, to the effects that climate change could have on communities?
Absolutely. I think, you know, hunting is just one thing, one small effect of climate change, the lack of ability to go hunting in the Arctic. But there are hundreds of stories just like this one of people who are affected by climate change right now. And I think when other people in the South hear these stories, in the South I mean southern Canada and I guess the rest of the world, when they hear these stories, I think they might be a little bit more compelled to actually act.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, but I was just going to point out, of course, if you're a seal, maybe climate change is good.
Well, I think there's other things to worry about as well, so.
In terms of these communities and their leverage within Canada as a country, how would you rate it? I mean, clearly we've had the Keystone pipeline controversy recently. You've got the Alberta tar sands. What sort of leverage does this community have in Canada?
Well, they certainly don't have a big mass of oil that they're sitting on. I think we've seen a lot more focus on indigenous populations in the Arctic by the current government, if only because they recognize it as an important issue for the rest of Canadians. And they also recognize that there's a lot of mineral wealth that they'd like to be sort of, you know, on the right terms with people who are living on top of that mineral wealth. And so, it's hard to answer that question, you know, legitimately.
Yeah. And over the longer term, what's your projection for these communities? Are they going to have to move their houses? Are they going to have to move further south, or is there still a potential for them to live in those areas?
You know, Inuit have been adapting to climate change and changes in their environment for hundreds, if not thousands of years. I don't think we're going to see these communities going anywhere. I think Inuit will adapt, and they'll figure out new ways to live with the climate that they've been given.